We all remember recess growing up in school. Recess was a time of day where you could have all the conversations that you could not have while in class. Recess is where you had the real conversations. And real conversations we're going to have. In each episode of the Recess Podcast, I'm going to have real conversations explaining students and school. I'm David McGuire, and I'll be your host. It's recess time, y'all. What's up, beautiful people? I'm back again, David McGuire. This is the Recess Podcast, and this is episode 20. We've made it to episode 20. Excited to be here. This is part 4 of the 4-part series, the Race for the School Board, and this is part 3, talking about the IPS School Board. So I'm excited about this conversation. If you're a first-time listener to the Recess Podcast, welcome. And Recess Podcast stands for Real Education Conversations, explaining students in school. And I feel like this is going to be a very real conversation. The last 3 have been great, including the last 2, particularly about IPS. And so we're really excited. Again, the purpose of this show is to give these candidates an opportunity to engage with you all. We hope you will engage. So like and share this video. I want to name this again. I'm not here endorsing any candidate. I said it on the first show. I'm here endorsing the people. And I'm for the people, and this is for the people. And so we're going to talk for the people. So the questions that I ask are fair, but I'm not here to personally attack anybody. But I am going to give these candidates an opportunity to address certain issues and topics that's important, that's on people's minds. And I'm going to give them the floor. So if you have questions, feel free to jump in the comments. But we won't do any personal attacks of any candidate or any view. But it's a very decisive topic. It's people are going to disagree, and we're good with that. We're going to have a healthy debate. So before we jump in, I know the presidential debate is tonight, but it don't start till 9. So make sure you tune in with us the entire time. We'll be done by 8:30. So this is the show before the show. So without further ado, I'll let my 2 candidates introduce themselves. Ms. Smith, I'll go with you first. Feel free. I'll give you the solo screen. Introduce the folks who you are, what district you're running for, and why you're running.
Okay. Hi, my name's Christina Smith. I am running for IPS School Board in District 4, which is south or west side, down around, going counterclockwise south all the way around, including Fountain Square. So I am a parent of 2 students who are IPS students, and I have decided to run because for the past several years, I have been involved with education advocacy, pro-public education advocacy here in IPS. And in doing that, and in my own experience with my children's school, I have been able to see the inequities that exist and how different schools are treated differently. And those inequities usually go along racial and socioeconomic lines. And that's not what I want for children. I want every child to have as robust and as amazing education as I feel my children are getting at IPS. So I decided to run because I want to bring education equity to the children of Indianapolis.
Love it. Love it. Well, welcome to the show. Mr. Brandon Randall, your turn, sir. Introduce the folks who you are, what district you're running for, and why you're running.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, David, for the invitation. So my name is Brandon Randall. I'm running for IPS School Board District 1. District 1 is the Near East Side, Irvington, Christian Park, Lockerbie, Emerson Heights, and all of those neighborhoods in between. So I decided to run because I worked with young people and families for 13 years, and I've always done grassroots work, mentorship, advocacy, activism. And so I really wanted to take my work that I've been doing to a higher level of systemic impact. And I felt that the school board was an opportunity to do that. So I'm just trying to make sure that, all students, all parents, are represented equally, and focusing on equity issues, but also focusing on some other important issues like trauma and healing-centered engagement, and then recreating this narrative around leadership. So that's why I'm running. I'm excited to be a part of this process. I have learned so much about the education scene here in Indianapolis, and I'm just, pushing through and working for a positive outcome. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you, David.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hey, you both said it. Like, this is you learn a lot in this process, and it's a lot to unpack. So again, thank everybody for tuning in. Again, I have my questions, and then we'll have some time, like I said, to get those questions in the comments. So drop those questions in the comments, and we'll go after them. So I'll start with the first question, right? And then you kind of probably hit on it, but kind of go a little deeper. What do you feel is the biggest problem, right? So you talked about the things that motivated you to run, but what do you feel is the biggest problem right now facing the Indianapolis Public School? And anyone, you can jump in at any time.
Okay. So like I said, education equity or educational equity, in my opinion, is the biggest issue that we face in IPS, because everything affects that, right? So, funding, resources, engagement, communication, marketing, staffing, all of those things affect educational equity. And then if we had educational equity, we would see all those things be different. So right now in IPS, we, like I said previously, these inequities fall along racial and socioeconomic lines. Our wider, more affluent magnet programs are getting considerably more money than our more minority, lower income neighborhood schools. I was actually kind of shocked to see that one magnet program gets $777,000 more than neighborhood schools. That's a huge amount when we're talking about education. And that's per year. And so we also see the funding that's supposed to be going to struggling schools often isn't making it to the classroom. A few years ago, I was involved with IPS 43, and we were told by a previous board member that the school was getting hundreds of thousands of dollars extra money. But parents and teachers were saying that they don't know where that's going because they're not seeing any additional folks in the building. So, so there's all of these things that are affecting educational equity, and then those are coming out as student achievement. So we have low performing schools, we have opportunity gaps, we have achievement gaps. All of these things are affected because we're not providing that equitable education to every student in the district.
Yeah, I think that when we look at equity ties into so many things. I think for me, one of the largest issues are, what students are being left behind. We know that traditionally in all school systems, Black and brown students are typically, not provided the most equitable resources, or they are, caught in this opportunity or learning gap. But I want to take that like a step further and look at, what other demographics. So when we look at students who are suspended, expelled, but also arrested, so looking at how that impacts student learning, how that impacts the development of engagement and trust amongst families in the schools. Typically, it's Black and brown children that are suspended and expelled more disproportionately, but also looking at arrest. Black males and young Black females are typically more introduced to law enforcement, but for the exact same scenarios, if not less serious scenarios than their white student counterparts. And so we don't talk a lot about the introduction to law enforcement or what arrest looks like. So here in Indianapolis, and I can only speak from that experience. If a student is arrested, even if they're not arrested on school grounds, if they are simply arrested and they have received 2 misdemeanors or 1 felony, the school is contacted, and that school has the opportunity to expel that student. They don't have to get in trouble at that school, but that is an option for them due to the safety of other students. And so what we don't talk about is how do we reintegrate students returning from detention or incarceration back into a school system. So for me, I feel like we do have a lot of conversations about educational equity. We know that the resources are not there. That's common knowledge. That's not anything that we haven't discussed. But I think when we tap into what are we doing with students who are returning from being locked up, nobody's talking about that. and they are not getting the services they need, and that's a problem. David, you're on mute, buddy.
I'm on mute. Look, I muted myself. My own show. I've had this question for the other two shows, and I never asked it, so I'm gonna ask it early because it's something I want to know because I think it's important. So for all transparency, if you guys don't know, I am those that's listening, I mean, I know I am a principal of a charter school in Indianapolis, so and been an educator my entire career. But recruitment and retention of staff, right? So like there's this notion out there, true or not true. I'm not here to say it's true. I don't know. It's depends on who you ask. That teachers don't want to go to IPS or don't stay in IPS. So if elected, what do you want to do, and how will you advocate to ensure that first teachers want to come teach in IPS, and then how will you ensure that the teachers in IPS will stay in IPS?
Christy, I'll let you go first.
Okay, so I think that, so in talking to teachers, because I have lots of teachers that contact me and speak with teachers, and even teachers at my kids' schools that they've been to, I don't think that it is just a pay issue. It's definitely not just a pay issue. I actually had a teacher tell me the other day that they would, if they could trade X, if they could have this be better, they would give up their pay raise in a heartbeat. So I think that we have to look at, and we have to admit that being a teacher is a job and a career and a profession like any other career, job, or profession. We have to treat workers better, period. That's just all there is to it. You can't expect good outcomes and good productivity and people to stay and be loyal if you don't treat them properly, right? So, and this goes for the entire nation. I mean, there's all kinds of surveys and stuff that have been done that's what teachers want. They want to be respected. They want to be valued. They want to be treated well. And I think that goes for any job, right? I mean, I wouldn't want to stay somewhere where I didn't feel like I was valued as a professional. So we have to treat our employees well as a district.
Yeah.
We have to change this culture that teachers have been reporting for several years, that they're scared to speak out when things are wrong, that they are in fear that they'll be targeted. We also have the problem in IPS that a lot of teachers who are dedicated to underperforming schools or choose to go to an underperforming, a low performing on standardized test school, that they don't have stability, right? Because at any time, the district could come in and say, we want your school to become an innovation school. So then they either have to give up their position with the district or go to another school. So we have to treat employees well. We have to offer them stability. We have to make it a good work environment for teachers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Brett, before you go out, and you can jump in this too. So I know, because Chris, you said something about teachers wanting more than just the pay, right? I would give up X, in relation to the pay. Because, I think was a few years back, they passed a referendum that allowed for $11,000 increase in teacher pay, in hopes of, I think what I'm assuming is they wanted to make sure that the pay was equal or competitive to other districts, because that was the thing. Like, if I'm getting paid $10,000 less for the same experience, I can go somewhere else and get that money. So now that they've done that, but you're saying in addition to that, there's other factors that teachers want. So even with the pay, it's like, well, heck, I can still get the same amount of money somewhere else because I can get Z, right?
Yeah.
Got you.
Yeah. So, passing the referendum allowed teachers to basically get the raises that they should have been getting every year, like most employees get at other jobs, right? So was a historic raise? Yeah, because they hadn't gotten raises in over 10 years. So, and like you said, that basically just brought them up to what the market was demanding that be.
Yeah.
But we have to admit that in IPS, we have populations that are more challenging for teachers at some of our schools. So we have to really look at not only pay, but also that work environment and how we're treating teachers as a whole and where we value teachers as a district. Because teachers are like any other stakeholder. They deserve a seat at the table whenever decisions are made.
Got you. So Brandon, what if elected to the board, what do you want to see from a recruitment and a retention standpoint with IPS teachers?
Right. Yeah. So for me, it is, I think that we have to do a better job at highlighting stories of why teachers have stayed. There are, and not just, and honestly, it's not just teachers, it's paraprofessional staff. Sometimes you'll have paraprofessional staff in schools that have been there longer than teachers. So I think it's highlighting why people stay. So I talked to he was a media assistant the other day. He's been with the district 20 plus years. And, beyond all of his concerns, all of the challenges that he's had, he said that the reason why he stays with this district specifically is because he loves the students and he loves the families that he's able to serve. And I think that we have to rely on storytelling to really get that narrative out there. Because, if we had to be honest, a lot of times the coverage on IPS is negative. And if you throw in geography, if you say you work at an East Side IPS school, there's sometimes there is this double negative, stereotypes and labeling that takes place. And I think that we have to counter that. There are a lot of amazing staff and educators who work in these schools. I think the other part is effective leadership. Your team is going to be cohesive if the leadership invests in that team. So we have to look at how is their relationship building in schools. We talk about culture and climate all the time, and we usually talk about that in framing of student engagement, but culture and climate is real for leadership and all of the educators in that building. So we have to make sure we're fostering cohesive, collective teams inside of these buildings and at the district level in order for this to be, a mutually beneficial experience. And sometimes you have that disconnect in these buildings. I've seen that personally working for an IPS school. And unfortunately, that trickles down to the classroom, that trickles down to family engagement. So we have to be able to support all players in the school with the support systems they need, but also making sure that that cultural climate is on point.
Absolutely. All right. So again, I appreciate it. I see folks in the comments. I see you guys getting those questions. Again, we're going to get to those questions. So just because we haven't put it up there, we're going to definitely get to them. All right. So you guys talked about two things, and we got to get to both of them. So I'm trying to figure out which one. So we're gonna jump right into. I'm gonna ask the question, and I asked this of all the candidates because I want to know. And we talked about it a little bit in the pre-show. So I'll ask it, and I'll be simple. I'm gonna go to this one. Yeah, here we go. What do you say to people who fear that the IPS board is full of bought seats and it doesn't represent the people, right? We talked about it in the pre-show, and I asked that question because I'll name it. The story came out and they dropped financial figures for everybody, which a great, public record, but how will you ease the fears, or have you been trying to ease the fear of those folks who are saying all these seats are bought anyway, so it doesn't matter, right? How are you easing the fears of those folks to let you know my seat isn't bought, that I am here for the people and I will speak and I will represent those individuals in my district?
Go ahead, Brandon.
I was trying to find my mute button. So, and this is one of the things that I learned very quickly getting into this process. So for me, and I'm going to use I statements to make sure that I'm speaking just for myself. So for me, I did not take specific endorsements for my campaign. And that decision was mine and mine alone. And that was just based upon how I view, education and, my personal opinions on some of these external influences. So for my campaign, I've only raised $2,000, and I did receive about $10,000 in support from the teachers union. That is 100% marketing, right? So flyers, yard signs, and mailers. I got one mailer. That was it, just one. So, but besides that, I had 37 contributions, and all 37 came from my Facebook friends list. And so for somebody who's been a grassroots organizer, I wanted to run a grassroots campaign. Now, the problem is I knew that meant that if my opponent was able to receive, those more high-end dollar contributions, I knew that was going to be, I'll address that here in a minute, Brandon. Thank you. I knew that it was going to be a challenge, right? So for me, I don't even, and this might be controversial and some people might get upset. I don't honestly, if I had to honestly answer, I don't think everybody who is receiving these large contributions, I don't think that they have ill intentions. I honestly don't. I know several of the candidates who have received lots and lots of contributions. Do I think that they have ill intentions and that they individually have private agendas? I don't. Do I think some of the people that are supporting them may have one? Yes. So as far as bought seats, honestly, I'm worried about myself right now. And I'm just trying to focus on my campaign and what I can do with the limited amount of dollars that I have. Now, to address the comment in the chat box.
Right. So before that, and I'm gonna put it up here because you're gonna address it. Help me as you talk about it. Explain when you say you got an endorsement from the teachers union, right? And it's just for marketing, and that money versus the Facebook money. So if you could do both, and that's more so for me too, because you're trying to read that. So I'm gonna put the comment up here, and then I'll let you go ahead, and address that.
Yeah. So Brandon Brown, who we all know. He asked why, he said, that is breaking news. Why wasn't that reported? So all of my money that was received up until October 9th, I believe that was the deadline. All of that money had to be reported on the CFA 4, right? Okay. So all of my money that I had received, actually received by that deadline was all of my grassroots contributions. And that amount totaled roughly around $2,000. The endorsement from the teachers union has not been reported because I had not received that money yet, right? So yes, I did receive their endorsement, but I have not received their financial contribution yet. So that's why it was not reported on my form. But when I have to do my annual form, which is due in January, it will be reflected. And that's the other thing. I have nothing to hide. I'm not receiving beyond that one large endorsement. That's the only one I got. So for me, transparency is key. And we keep asking, what do people want out of a board member? It's transparency. Yeah. So I can't be a hypocrite and not be transparent when I'm pushing for transparency. Yeah. And then how did you pay for your mailers that were done? It's called invoices, apparently. That's what this process entails. So when I want to, and Christine, I'm gonna let you go. This is why I asked, because I know this is the big one, and this is the one that a lot of folks have a question with. So when you get the money, right, whether it's through endorsements or Facebook friends, all that money that goes to your campaign, that's what you report. And it sounds like there's two deadlines. There's the October one, and then there's one after the election. Yes.
Is there, and this is for me, is there not one right before the election, but like after October? Okay.
No, and so this is what I had to learn, because so you had to file a CFA 1, which basically was like a declaration of your committee, right? Okay. That didn't require you to list any money. It was just saying that you opened a committee. And if you look at my file, I didn't know there was a deadline. I filed mine the same day I filed my financial report. So there it is. I mean, that wasn't something that was requiring you to say any money that you had. That simply was saying that you had like a committee, or you had a campaign account.
Gotcha.
Along
okay.
So if you look on Marion County Election Board website, it gives a schedule of deadlines. So there's the pre-election report, which was just due on I believe it was the 19th. It was last Friday. The next deadline is in January. And so for everybody who's running, if you have received more than $500 in contributions, anything after October 9th will go onto everything, including what we received after October 9th, will go on that January report. So for me, the report that people see, and it's just the $2,000, and it does not have my teacher's endorsement, the teachers union endorsement money, that's because I have not received that check yet. Now, I do have mailers and flyers and yard signs that have been is their invoice. So the money will be reported, but it wasn't received by the deadline.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I hope that clarifies things.
Yeah, it did.
Christy is way more knowledgeable on this process.
So
we're sure she can provide clarity.
and so we're gonna go to you, and it's the same question, right? So you are in District 4.
Yeah, 4. Yeah.
District 4. Okay. So how will you, and how have you ease the fears of those that feel like the seats are bought, and make sure that you represent the voices and the people of District 4. And you can even jump into some of the things that Brandon talked about to provide some insight if you want as well.
Yeah. So I have received the check from the teachers union, from IPS, right, which is the political action committee that represents ISTA, which is the Indiana State Teachers Association, which is who covers IPS teachers, and then also IEA, the Indianapolis Education Association, which is the bargaining unit that's specifically for IPS teachers. So there's a PAC that covers those called IPACE. And they decided this year, unlike previous years, that they would pay for specific things. So whereas previously they gave like a certain amount of money to a candidate, this year they said we're going to pay for X number of mailers, X number of walk pieces, and X number of yard signs. So like I received 10,000 walk pieces, 1 complete District 4 mailer, which was approximately 14,000, and then 250 yard signs. And those invoices I then had to send on and tell someone how much they equaled, and then they cut me a check for about that amount. So I received my check, but I hadn't deposited yet. It's $11,000. I'm not hiding anything at all. I just hadn't deposited yet because I couldn't do it on my phone. I hadn't made it to the bank when it was open. I have nothing to hide. To ease fears of people that say that I may be bought by a teachers union or something of that sort. When we had our endorsement interviews with the teachers union, I specifically told them that I'm not completely against charter schools and innovation schools. I feel that they should be done a certain way, and I feel that there should be a certain process that is done, but I'm not completely against that. So other than that, I don't know how that, and I don't know anyone that's ever heard me speak that could ever say that I would be bought or influenced by someone that I didn't agree with, because that's just, I mean, honestly, like for me, I'm not gaining anything out of this. I'm a parent. You know, I mean, like I'm a parent. I have no career goals beyond being on the school board right now. And I just don't see how buying specific items would say that my seat was bought. I mean, if someone wants to say that, that's on them. I mean, that's fine. And I agree with Brandon. I don't think that anyone running has any ill intention towards students. I don't think that, I think that we have a fundamentally different viewpoint of outside agendas beyond ourselves. So we have to understand that while, yes, we are individuals that may want the best for children, there are these other agendas that are at play that don't have anything to do with us specifically as people, but the decisions that we may possibly make, right? So I heard someone say the other day that your endorsements reflect your agenda. So I didn't seek endorsements of organizations that I don't agree with. And I'll just come out and say it. Like, I didn't seek the endorsement for RISE. I did not fill out their paper and send it back. I did not seek the endorsement from Stand for Children because it didn't come in as parents. It came in from Stand for Children. It said Stand for Children at the top, and that's an organization that I don't agree with how they have conducted themselves in meetings that I've seen. So that wasn't something that I was interested in. So I think that when we talk about all of the money that is being thrown into IPS school board race, and especially money that's coming in from folks that have absolutely nothing to do with IPS, but do have an agenda to privatize education as a whole and to do things like get rid of teachers' unions, then we have to understand that's why the money is coming in like this, because those decisions that we make affect someone else's pocketbook down the line.
Gotcha. Yeah. So we're and I'm going to pivot because you mentioned what your statement about innovation schools. So I'm going to ask the question, right? Like, based off what you guys you've done your research, right? Running for school board. So, and again, what I think is while you represent a district and on the school board, you would definitely speak on the behalf of those in your district. You also represent the school district in general, right? And so you're making, decisions on that. So just based off your research and your beliefs, right? Just there, what have you seen your track record on the innovation schools, and do you see them as a benefit to IPS students and families, or do you want the expansion of the innovation to stop? So I know it's a lot there, and I know you got the question beforehand. So the track record on innovation schools, what have you seen? Do you think they're beneficial, and do you want them to stop?
I'll go first. So for me, because that's the question that we were asked in every single questionnaire, every interview, and so charter and innovation and all of those questions. So for me, I have reported that I would support a moratorium on innovation. And the reason I said that is because, I feel like, if we are in the process of closing or, at the point where a traditional neighborhood school is in the, has the opportunity to be converted to an innovation, for me, I want to make sure that we have done everything that we could to support that school, support those students, support that community before it gets, converted to innovation with all of the tools that we possibly could. Now, for District 1, I have several innovation schools in my district. The most popular, I guess, as far as, a good model is Thomas Gregg Neighborhood School. Thomas Gregg is a great example of how the community came together, formed a plan, and was able to create this program. And I was able to speak with some of their staff members and their board members. And what I gathered is that the process that they use to turn that school into innovation is not the traditional method. A lot of other innovation schools, they weren't able to get all this community input. It was community led. There are so many great things happening over there. But I even asked the staff and board members at that school, I said, why couldn't that school have all of these resources, all of this momentum as a traditional neighborhood school and not an innovation school? And it basically came down to funding and resources. And for me, that was the problem. The problem is, why can't we look at the district in general and find a way to support schools in the way the innovation schools have, but keeping that leadership local, I guess? Because like I said, they kept all their staff. They didn't have other folks coming in that, didn't know the neighborhood, didn't know the school, didn't know the students. And so for me, that's my concern. I know several people who operate charter schools. I absolutely love India and I love Robert Marshall. And Robert Marshall has Vanguard on the west side. I love what he does and I love the model that he uses. So for me, I am not anti-charter, I'm not anti-innovation, but I am anti the approach because a lot of times it's not a collective, collaborative approach. And for me, individually, that is my challenge that I have with those school models.
Anti-approach. That's a new one. Write that one down. I haven't heard that one. So, Christina, same question. Your thoughts on innovation, and you named it, right? You said you weren't against it, but what is it that do you feel like they're benefiting the students and the families in IPS, and what's your thoughts on them moving forward?
So, my biggest issue is, and always has been, that there's nothing that an innovation school can do that a traditionally run IPS school can't or isn't already doing. The biggest thing, actually pretty much the only thing, is that teachers in a traditionally run school are going to be part of the collective bargaining unit and be part of the union, right? So that's the only thing. When we talk about school autonomy, we already have autonomous schools. When innovation schools first came to IPS, there were supposed to be different types of things, and autonomous schools were part of that, where they would be run like a charter, have free reign to do curriculum, time of day, length of day, all those kinds of things, but the teachers would still, the school would still be under IPS school board and not have a separate board, and teachers would still be part of the collective bargaining unit. So I don't understand why there's this push to have our schools controlled by outside boards, because everything can be done in a traditionally run school. So that's my biggest thing. My other thing, like Brandon said, is the approach, right? So we were at Cold Spring when Cold Spring decided to convert to become an innovation school. At that same year, I had my daughter was at Seidner. The conversation and how it went at Cold Spring was, this is what we're doing, get on board or leave. The conversation that came to Seidner was, hey, here's this thing that we can do. Here's the benefits. Here's the cons. What do you as parents want? And I can't help but think that the difference is the population of the parents, right? So we're not seeing innovation schools being pushed at our predominantly white or more affluent schools. We're seeing them pushed in lower income and minority schools. And having been a part of many community meetings for Innovation Restart, parents aren't given all the information. They're not given all the facts. They're not told everything. And when it comes to restarts, this is presented as the only solution, right? So IPS allows schools, and people can say they don't allow them to fail, okay, but the schools fail for multiple years before anything drastic is done. And then the only solution offered is, because we're going to hand you to a charter school. They don't get to pick the school. They don't get to pick the model. They don't get to be a part of it. It's not like Thomas Gregg. I went to the community meetings for Thomas Gregg. If every single innovation school came about like Thomas Gregg did, I think it would be a completely different scenario and situation. And yeah, there have been the other thing is, we can't look at all innovation schools the same, right? So we have charter partners that come on that are already standalone charters or are not a restart school, like Heron, Purdue Poly, KIPP. Those schools are separate. In my opinion, you can't compare those to the innovation restart schools, where you have a charter partner or an innovation school that is coming in and taking over a school that's already existing. So we are seeing some modest gains after several years in innovation restarts, but we also have to look at the stability of the schools that is happening because someone else has come in and taken them over. Most of the schools that were restarted were incredibly unstable, with changing leadership, changing teachers, classrooms that didn't have permanent full-time teachers in the class the whole year. So you have all of these all of these other things that are affecting student achievement at schools, that by having a stable partner come in changes some of those. And I don't understand why IPS can't do that.
Gotcha.
So there's that. And then I think that we also have to look at, because everyone wants to look at Heron and Purdue Polytechnic as these panaceas of what innovation schools are, and understand that, yes, they have amazing student achievement when compared to some traditionally run IPS schools, but they're also very exclusionary in their enrollment practices, right? So if we're going to bring on outside charter partners and provide funding in the way of services, or like Heron gets an additional $500 because of the changing and the complexity rating, we need to make sure that IPS students and IPS as a district is getting the best deal out of that. Like, we should have made Heron give #1 priority to any student in IPS. So those students move to the top of the list. Same thing for Purdue Poly. I'm not positive if that's their enrollment process, but we need to be making sure that these schools have as few exclusionary practices when it comes to enrollment and attendance as possible, as well as making sure that IPS is getting the best deal out of it, and that our students are the ones that are going to benefit the most.
Got you. All right, look, so these folks are jumping in these comments, so I got my own questions, but people don't want to hear my questions, so I'll let those that pop questions in, and some of we've addressed. So I'm gonna start at the very top of our scroll, and so Christina, looks like this first one's for you. So it says, what specifically have you done to advocate for students of color in IPS, and how does she know that her strategy is the best strategy? I'll put it up here just again, the specific question. Yeah.
So what have I done specifically? So my approach to advocacy is to help inform parents and tell parents and teach parents how to advocate for themselves. So when it's mainly been when schools are being taken over, because let's admit, most people don't know what's going on a lot of times until there's something drastic happening. We're contacted. IPS Community Coalition, myself as a parent, we're contacted by parents, by teachers, community members, and they want to know what can they do? What can I do to save my school? They want to come in here. So what I have done is provided parents with information, because let's face it, navigating IDOE is a nightmare sometimes, and now it's even worse. So, providing parents with information, letting them know that there is an alternative, that their school doesn't have to become an innovation school, but they need to speak up if that's what they want. And even doing things like teaching parents how to navigate signing up to go speak at a school board meeting. So there's all of these engagement things that happen with advocacy and helping to teach parents those things. Now, what have I done? So I feel like that whenever I am helping a parent know all the information, that is advocating for students. And, it doesn't, if that's a student of color, then it's a student of color. If it's a white student, it's a white student. And I have focused mainly on public education and keeping schools under local control, because I feel like that we can do all of these things as an IPS school. And I feel like that if we are working towards that educational equity of ensuring that we have equitable distribution of funding, that we have schools that are segregating by doing proximity boundaries, things like that, those are specific things that we've advocated for, in addition to changing the process around innovation schools, because the majority of innovation research schools have happened in poor and predominantly minority schools. So when I help a parent to find that power, to find their voice, and I've told parents this, my job as an advocate is to provide you with all the information that you need. If you decide that you don't agree with me, then you don't agree with me. Advocate for your child. Do what you have to do what you want to do as a parent. But I'm here to provide you with the information and teach you how to advocate for yourself.
Got you.
And I think that most of our parents don't know that.
Yeah. And I'm going to ask you a question about the IPS Community Coalition, because that was on there. And so, all right. And then either again, so got another question here. So when we were talking about, I believe this is about when we were talking about retention, teachers and stuff. So is the student population actually more challenging, as you stated, or are teachers not adequately prepared? And Brennan, you kind of touched on it too when you talked about the importance of leadership, right? And how leadership plays a role. So just you two real quick, like, is it student populations are actually more challenging in some schools, or is it do also those schools with more challenging students also don't have the teachers equipped to handle those challenging students? What do you guys follow with that?
Yeah, so I think, when we look at, students that may be in need of more resources and supports, I think we have to look at how that school and how the district is providing this collective collaborative approach. When I worked at School 57, I was the parent involvement educator. I worked very close in tandem with the behavior specialist and the social worker. So it was a trio. So if we had a student who needed additional support, whether that was during the school day or, family in general, we would get together and form a plan to basically a wraparound plan. So for me, I think that students are experiencing a lot more challenges in general, not them being challenging, but their experiences, whether that's COVID, whether that is our record-breaking homicide rate, again, year after year. So when we look at trauma, our students are experiencing so much trauma. And unless we are intentionally addressing that and providing the necessary supports and resources, there's no way we could expect teachers to take on that challenge by themselves. Teachers in this current time are already having to modify maybe what they've always learned on how to teach. So we have to utilize our resources better and step in and stand in that gap where those resources haven't been utilized, or we have to be creative on how we put them to play. But we really have to look at how trauma is impacting families, communities, but also educators. I think a lot of times the conversation is how trauma impacts students and families, but educators are also impacted by that. And so I think we really have to utilize this village approach and make sure that all people invested in the success of these students, whether that's the students themselves, families, educators, the community in general, have every tool at disposal to be successful.
I'll say this on that point about the students versus teachers. Any school that is considered challenging or has more significant needs, whether it's gaps academically or trauma, and when I say we, I'm talking about an education system. So that's IPS, Tinley, which is where I work, and I'll name it. Whether it's KIPP, Purdue Polytechnic, you have to consider the type of teachers that you're bringing into your building. And if you are bringing new and inexperienced teachers, then you better damn sure do a good job of building them up and training them the right
Absolutely.
way. And so for me, I work at Tinley Summit, Far East Side. Love the Far East Side. If you got anything bad to say about it, come see me, because I can take offense of it. But anyway, I know that because of the side of town and what comes with that, which is a lot of it is based on the lack of resources that the city gives us, but that's neither here nor there. I have to make sure that my teachers that come in my building are adequately trained. And so when you work on the Far East Side in areas like that, where you have students that are dealing with, Brennan, what you said, certain traumas, then we have to do a better job, principals, leaders, school networks, of training those teachers. And if we don't, then we cannot blame the kids. We have to blame us. And we really can't even blame the teachers, especially if you didn't train them right. So that's my piece on that. I'll get back. Go ahead, Brennan.
Well, and I think again, that's why I go back to, I feel like the board has to be vocal about that. I know when we were doing another round of interviews and somebody was asked if the school board, should be active in conversations around trauma and the homicide rate. and somebody said that they didn't think that that was the board's role, and I almost lost my shit. Like, that is absolutely the board's role. Like, we are representing this district. Like, we literally have humans depending on how we're managing this district, and we absolutely have to speak out. Because and I was going to say earlier, the conversation about charter innovation, RISE, teachers union, Stand for Children, yes, all of those conversations are important, and they are a very contentious areas of conversation. But there are kids out here dying. There are kids out here that are homeless. And to be honest, I'm low-key tired of the foolishness back and forth that is not including conversations on what these families are going through. Because my students, every one of my students have a gun charge, and they have been arrested, and they're in the system. And I have had 2 kids shot this week. I've had 2 kids who are literally living on the street, and we out here bickering about who can get funding and who Stanfield Children and the teachers union are supporting. Families do not care. Like, they don't care about that. They want to make sure they're going to eat tomorrow, and they want to make sure their kid is not shot and killed and making breaking news overnight. I'm tired of it, and I'm irritated, and I need more people to focus on these immediate issues versus these long-standing political debates that we keep having over and over again. My fault. I'm just pissed off.
Listen, I agree, because I go on tangents on my other show about all of that, and I feel like one of the reasons why if anybody asks me what do I want to see from a school board, I want to see school boards address those issues. Finance is important, making sure districts are balanced right, because again, we know what happens when that doesn't happen. Academic scores is also important, and we're going to get on that. I need the boards pushing schools to talk about whether or not kids can annotate a text, whether or not kids can read and comprehend nonfiction text, and whether or not schools and kids can draw an array of math. I need boards involved with that. And people say they shouldn't be, and I say they should be. But anyway, Christine, I want to go back to you because you mentioned it, and I want to get clarity. Other folks want to get clarity, and it's something that we hear. What is the IPS Community Coalition? What is it about? What is the purpose and the focus, and what are you guys trying to accomplish in the district?
So IPSCC was started as an advocacy and watchdog type organization for IPS. So we collectively are pro-public, meaning that we are generally opposed to outside control. So generally opposed to charter schools, innovation schools, vouchers, all those types of things. Again, we are all individuals. So some of us, like myself, have a little bit different view of innovation and charter schools, meaning that if it's done correctly, I don't have as big of an issue with it. And I think that there are some that do it very well. But what we are advocating for, and I took notes just so I can make sure that I hit on everything since I am representing the organization, is quality and equitable publication or equitable public education for all IPS students. We believe in transformative, community-based schools, evidence-based practices that improve education based on community level needs, uplifting neighborhoods, parents, and student voices, and centering them in the decision-making process. We're here to push for transparency, engagement, and again, to act as a watchdog. So what we want is we want IPS to be centering the folks who should be centered, right? So like Brandon said, we shouldn't be centering organizations and dollar bills and things like that. We need to be centering students, families, and the communities that they come from. And that is who should be making decisions for our schools. And that is who should always be at the center of any decision that we make. So what are we hoping to accomplish? We're hoping exactly that, equitable public education for all students in IPS, for IPS to be transparent and engaged and student and community based and centered.
Because I know, and it gets you said you represent the organization, so you see the back and forth and the comments, and I think the last part you said put it in context for me when you use the word watchdog, right? You guys feel like, as you said, parents are coming to you and teachers are coming to you about things, and I think you named it. You're very for IPS, right? The IPS as it stands and being locally controlled. And like you said, I believe that's you all's goal. And it is interesting. And, it's a contentious, where you fall in the debate and everything like that. But thank you for clearing it up for me. And I know folks that want to ask. First of all, I got to give a shout out to the folks in the comments. These questions are fire. And we only got like 8 minutes. And I still got to give these individuals their closing remarks. But these folks got some great questions in here. So I'm going to get to this one. I just lost it because I haven't even – there's so many that are coming up that are great. So go back to the teachers union. I'm going to find it. It says something about what group – did a group name that they were trying to get rid of the teacher union? Like, did they name it or do you feel like their approach and how they're moving the district is trying to get rid of the teachers union? I'm trying to find – here. Nope.
Sorry, I'm not looking. So I think is that referring to privatization of public education?
I think somebody asked, is there a group that's specifically trying to get rid of the union? Yeah, here it is. Who has an agenda to get rid of the teachers union, and why is that an agenda? Is that someone's agenda? And I think some of these larger groups, I think that what they're referring to. Is there a group that's out there promoting the end of teacher unions, or are you interpreting their beliefs and their direction they're trying to take the district is to get rid of teachers unions?
So nationally, there's a group called ALEC, which is the American Legislative Exchange Council. And I basically say if there's a bad piece of legislation that you've seen perpetuated throughout America, it probably comes from them, because it does. So they are a group of very right-wing legislators and big businesses. And let's face it, big businesses don't like unions because unions force them to pay higher wages and better salaries and more benefits and affect their pocketbook, right? So whenever they can introduce legislation like right to work or anything that would weaken a union, that's what they do, because they're there for their members, which is businesses, and big businesses at that. We're not talking about mom and pop, we're talking about big businesses here. So yeah, they want to get rid of teachers unions. Then we also have, in the education front specifically, Ed Choice, used to be called the Friedman Foundation, bases that they want basically a privatized education system where there isn't public education like we know it today. They would want an all privatized organization. And if folks are interested in, finding out anything addition to this, I encourage them to look at Network for Public Education, Diane Ravitch's blog. She used to work for the Federal Department of Education, and has a lot of information about different agendas and outside things that play into this. Do I think that is the sole agenda of any organization currently located in Indianapolis? Not necessarily. And do I think that that's their agenda? No, but I think that those who fund them, that's part of what they're wanting to see.
Listen, and again, these comments are fire, but again, we're getting close to the hour, and we all want to see what this foolery is about to be at 9 o'clock. I can say that because it's my own show. But so I want to give you guys an opportunity for closing thoughts. Again, you guys see the comments. So if you feel like there was something in that comment that you want to address in your closing thoughts, be my guest. But if not, you can just give your closing thoughts. So in this closing thoughts, I want you to speak to the folks in your district, District 1 and District 4 respectively. But more importantly, I want you to speak to what will IPS look like if you are sitting on that board, right? I wanted to all talk about that, because I think that's important. And I don't want people to forget that while you represent your district, you represent the other 10, 15, 20,000, whatever it is, kids there are, and the X amount of teachers as well. And to the folks in the comments, I appreciate you. What I will do is this. I'm going to call them out. So my NDK12 folks, we are also live streaming this. Shantae and Andrew, we're going to do a show, the three of us again, and we're going to go deeper with this conversation. And we're going to answer some of these questions based on our thoughts as well. So I want to do that. So we'll go in reverse order. So Christina, I'll put you up first, back on the solo screen. Make your final plea to District 4 and the IPS teachers, families, community on why you should be elected and what you're going to bring.
So I want everyone in the district to have a voice in the district, right? So I think that a lot of times parent voices are lost, teacher voices are lost, staff voices are lost, community voices are lost, and we focus completely on this board of 7, and it's just that discussion. And I feel like a lot of times discussions aren't had in public, and that's important. So my philosophy is engagement of everyone and bringing everyone to the table. I would love to see a lot of things change in IPS when it comes to communication and engagement. And additionally to that, making IPS more equitable. So like I said before, I want every single child to have that transformative, fabulous, robust education that I feel like my students are getting. I want every child to have that, and I've continuously advocated for that. When it comes to our district, I'm going to go back to a question that you had that we didn't get to, which was, I am going up against an incumbent who has been there for 15 years, and why do I feel like a new voice needs to be had? So let's look at what's happened in 15 years. We've had 4 schools taken over by the state. We've had outsourcing and contracting out of all buses and substitute teachers. In 2006, IDOE reports that there were 37,500 plus students in IPS. Today in 2020, they report that we only have 25,600. Our district grade has continued to fluctuate between D and F. We have 15 to 16 schools no longer under the control of the IPS school board. We have I-STEP scores that are low. Only 16% of our 3rd to 8th graders passed math and ELA, and only 6.3% of 10th graders passed math and ELA. We have more schools today with D and F in 2019 than there were in 2005. And that's not including schools with no grade available on state data. And not all schools are graded the same, because new charter and innovation schools get 3 years graded on growth alone. So in 2020, they reported that we had 30 D and F schools. And remember, that doesn't include the ones that don't have grades. We've had 6 high schools closed: John Marshall, Howe, Arlington, Northwest, Broad Ripple, and Key Learning. We have segregated schools. Our schools are more segregated than they ever have been. We have inequitable funding. Remember, we have magnet programs that service mostly white and more affluent students getting considerably more money than our struggling neighborhood schools. And in my opinion, we are worse positioned now as a public school district than we were 15 years ago. So what we need is strong voices on the board that are going to say the buck stops here, and we have to do something about how the lack of education our kids are getting.
I love it. I love it. Thank you. Thank you. Brandon, your turn. Same thing. You know, why you the voice of District 1? And to lead to that, you are running against someone who you guys are both are running for an open seat. And so that's important. And so talk about that. Talk about, you know, how you represent them in the district, and, you know, anything else that I might have missed that we didn't get to cover. So the floor is yours.
So Kelly Hershey had posted a comment in the chat about culture between teachers and students, and that was, you know, an area of major impact. So it is. And so for me, the reason that I decided to run is because I've worked with young people and families for over a decade. You know, this isn't something that I decided to do simply because I could. I'm invested. You know, this is personal. You know, there's, And I've heard over the last few weeks that, some people question my ability to serve on the board because I, am so invested in working with young people, and they want to make sure that I'm able to draw, needed boundaries. I'm gonna be honest, in this work, there aren't a lot of boundaries because we're literally dealing with human lives. Now, to answer Kelly's question, here's a resource by Dr. Christopher Emden. It's called For White Folks Who Teach in the Hood, and the rest of y'all too. This book talks a lot about neoliberalism and how that ties into education, but it talks about the necessity for teachers, specifically white teachers, to learn how to invest in these spaces with their students. There is a phrase in this book that he talks about called cosmopolitanism. And that is where you are investing holistically into an area, which means you are emotionally invested, you are physically invested, but you are putting everything that you can into that. We have to reshift this narrative about representation. Another educator, Dr. Jeffrey Duncan Andre, he wrote an article about the hope theory. And one of the sections was called Audacious Hope. That is where you are literally in the trenches with your students, with your families, with your community. As a board member, that's what I'm bringing as my experience. I literally have been in the trenches with students, families, and other educators for the last 13 years. And so, this isn't, my background is this, like, this is what I do. I've been a youth mentor, an advocate, I've done activism. This is all I know. Do I have a lot of background in business and finance? I don't. My opponent does. But what I am bringing is the ability to understand the importance of relationship building, of engagement, and authentically representing the voices of all students and all families. I want to be that board member to help recreate the narrative of what leadership looks like. I want to be able to create a leadership program for students who are low academic performing, high disciplinary history, and center their voices and their families and highlight their leadership. I used to work for a program called Public Allies, and our mantra was everyone leads. That is very much the truth. And so I'm just trying to bring all of these experiences to the board. For my district, I'm hoping for, a victory at the polls, but whether or not I get elected to the board or not, the work continues. This isn't something that I am going to compartmentalize and stop doing after November 3rd. This is what I do 24/7, 7 days, 24/7, 365. So, this is my passion. And Educator Barnes, I've heard critique of this book. I have. I just particularly like the concept of cosmopolitanism and using that collective, collaborative approach. So I'm hoping that the families and the parents and students and educators hear what I'm saying and that they agree. And even if they don't agree, I'm open to conversation. I definitely want to educate and be educated. Because to be honest, David, we're all in this together. Differing opinions, different, perspectives. At the end of the day, we are all focused on the same outcome, which is making sure our students and families are successful.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And again, I want to thank each of you for coming on and again, attacking and hitting head on the questions. Shout out to the folks in the comments. First of all, thank y'all for the questions. Thank you for asking tough questions, the right questions that you wanted to hear. I appreciate all of you. I appreciate you two coming on here. And just to wrap up the entire series, I want to thank all the guests that came on. And again, I can say this because it's my show. I had most of the folks that are running for school board come on. I appreciate y'all coming on. Those that didn't respond to me, because I did reach out to everybody. So I want to make that clear. I reached out to every candidate. So someone said that I didn't, and I did, and they chose not to come on. No hard feelings. That's cool. If you want to talk to me outside of this, this is fine. But thank you all for coming on, and I hope the folks listen. Hope the folks really came in with the open mind and open ear, and I believe they did. So again, folks, as we wrap this up, this is the end of this 4-part series. It's about the school board races, and we talked about IPS. We had some folks on from township schools, and so something that came up in that conversation, and I'm gonna pose it to you, and hopefully the other candidates that were on the previous shows, I want to pose it to them too. After the election, I would love to meet with the new IPS board, and so it's an open invitation. If you guys win, if you want to come back on, you are definitely welcome. Would love to do that show. But here's what I want to say to everybody. November 3rd, you see it on there. Go out there and vote if you haven't. If you've done an absentee ballot, good. If you've done early voting, good. If not, November 3rd, make sure you go vote. But here's what I want to say about voting. Vote as you should, and that's great. But our dreams and the dreams of our children cannot fit in no voting booth. So we vote people in, but that doesn't mean the work stops. We got to keep the work going, and we got to make sure that we continue, because our kids need more than just people checking the vote on election day or whatnot. So again, this has been a Recess Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. You'll see the link. You'll see clips of things that Christina and Brandon have said on social media. But again, as I always say in every show, what I'm about, create the platform, control the conversation, change the culture. This has been the Recess Podcast, and we're out. Please make sure you watch tonight. And please, I'm asking both candidates to give us something of substance. That's all I got. Have a good evening, everybody. Christina and Brandon, thank you again.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.